The crack of a rifle echoed across the dusty street of Salida, Colorado, as Delilah Morgan's world crumbled around her. She watched in horror as her husband, Clarence, stumbled backward into the arms of a burly man who caught him with a cold smile. Blood trickled from Clarence's split lip, and his left eye was already swelling shut. The year was 1878, and Delilah's 6 years of marriage had just culminated in the most devastating moment of her 24 years of life. "Your time's up, Morgan," growled Samuel Watts, the wealthiest gambling house owner in town. His expensive suit contrasted sharply with the dirt and grime of Salida's Main Street. "I've been more than patient with your promises." Clarence Morgan wiped blood from his mouth with a trembling hand. "Please, Sam, just one more week, I'll have your money." "You said that last month," Watts replied, adjusting his gold pocket watch. "And the month before. Your debt stands at $800. Pay now or face the consequences." Delilah clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, feeling the eyes of townsfolk watching from doorways and behind curtains. The mid-morning sun beat down mercilessly as her husband's gambling addiction was laid bare for all to witness. "I don't have it," Clarence admitted, his voice cracking. Samuel Watts's gaze traveled slowly to Delilah, and a chill ran down her spine despite the heat. "Perhaps you have something else of value." "No," Delilah whispered, but her protest was lost in the dusty air. Clarence followed Watts's gaze, and something changed in his expression. The desperation in his eyes hardened into calculation. "Maybe we can make an arrangement." "Clarence," Delilah warned, stepping forward. "Don't." Her husband ignored her. "My wife, she's a hard worker, good with numbers too. Could work off my debt in your establishment." Samuel Watts smiled, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Your wife, you say? A fine-looking woman indeed, but my establishment doesn't need another bookkeeper." "She can work however you want her to," Clarence insisted, avoiding Delilah's horrified stare. Delilah felt her knees weaken. "I'm your wife, not your property," she hissed, but the men continued as if she hadn't spoken. $800 is steep for a woman's contract," Watts mused, circling Delilah like a vulture. "Even one as pretty as this. She's educated, reads and writes better than any schoolmarm, keeps a fine home too." Watts reached out to touch Delilah's hair, and she jerked away. "Stand still, woman," he ordered. "If I'm buying you, I want to see what I'm getting." "You are not buying me," Delilah said, her voice stronger now despite the terror gripping her heart. "I am not for sale." A commotion at the end of the street interrupted the degrading transaction. A rider on a chestnut stallion approached at a measured pace. Tall and broad-shouldered, he sat easy in the saddle, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Dust clung to his denim pants and leather vest, marking him as someone who'd spent considerable time on the trail. The stranger reined in his horse and surveyed the scene before him. His eyes, as blue as a mountain lake, took in every detail from Samuel Watts's fine suit to Clarence's bloodied face to Delilah's terrified but defiant stance. "Seems I've ridden into some trouble," he said, his voice deep and measured. "Nothing that concerns you, stranger," Watts replied. "Just collecting a debt." "Looks more like you're collecting a person," the man observed, dismounting with fluid grace. He looped his horse's reins around a hitching post and stepped onto the boardwalk. Watts's men shifted uneasily. Though the stranger wore no visible gun, something in his bearing suggested danger. "The name's Elijah Grayson," he said. "Just rode in from Denver. Was hoping to find a peaceful town, but it appears Salida has its share of problems." "Move along, Grayson," Watts warned. "This is private business." Elijah Grayson ignored him, addressing Delilah directly. "Madam, are you being sold against your will?" Before she could answer, Clarence intervened. "My wife's helping me settle a debt. It's a family matter." "Doesn't look that way to me," Grayson replied. "Madam," Delilah lifted her chin, "I am not property to be traded, but my husband seems to believe otherwise." Elijah Grayson nodded, then turned to Watts. "How much is the debt?" $800, Watts replied, curiosity overtaking his annoyance. "And you're willing to take this woman as payment?" Grayson pressed. "She'd work it off eventually. Might take a few years in my establishment." Elijah's jaw tightened. Everyone present knew what kind of work Watts had in mind for Delilah. "I'll pay the debt," Grayson said. A stunned silence fell over the street. "Why would you do that?" Watts asked, suspicious. "Let's just say I dislike seeing people treated as property." Elijah reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather pouch. $800. Count it if you like." Watts took the pouch, eyeing the stranger warily. "This doesn't make her yours. You understand that, right? I'm not buying a person, Mr. Watts. I'm buying her freedom." "There's a difference." Elijah turned to Delilah. "Madam, once this transaction is complete, you owe me nothing. You're free to go wherever you please." Delilah stared at him in disbelief. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. Watts counted the money with experienced fingers, then nodded. "Debt's settled, Morgan. Consider yourself lucky this fool came along." He pocketed the cash and signaled his men to follow him back to the gambling house. Clarence stood awkwardly, his relief at escaping his debt mingling with confusion. "Thank you, mister, but she's still my wife." "No," Delilah said firmly. "Not anymore. You were willing to sell me like cattle. Our marriage is over, Clarence. You can't just—" "Yes, she can," Elijah interrupted. "I suggest you walk away now, while you still have your dignity." Something in his tone made Clarence reconsider whatever he'd planned to say. With a last resentful glance at Delilah, he limped away down the street. Delilah turned to her unexpected savior, studying him properly for the first time. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but handsome in a rugged way. Laugh lines crinkled at the corners of his eyes, contradicting the seriousness of his expression. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Grayson." "There's no need for thanks, and please call me Elijah." He glanced around at the dispersing onlookers. "Do you have somewhere safe to go?" Delilah's shoulders slumped. "Our home, Clarence's home, is just down the street, but I can't go back there now." "Do you have family nearby?" She shook her head. "My parents died 3 years ago." "I have a sister in Missouri, but—" She gestured helplessly at her simple dress and worn boots. "I don't have means to get there." Elijah considered this. "I have a small ranch about 5 miles outside of town. It's nothing fancy, but there's a cabin where my foreman used to live before he moved on. You'd be welcome to stay there until you decide what to do next." Delilah hesitated. Going with a strange man, even one who just helped her, carried its own risks. Reading her thoughts, Elijah added, "I won't be staying there. I have a room at the hotel in town. The cabin would be yours alone with no obligations, just a safe place to gather your thoughts." "Why are you doing this?" she asked again. Elijah's expression grew distant. "Let's just say I've seen what happens to women left with no options. I can afford to help, so I am." Delilah weighed her limited choices. Stay in town and face humiliation and potential danger from Clarence or Watts, or accept the offer of shelter from this stranger who had already shown more kindness than anyone else in Salida. "I accept your offer, Mr. Grayson, Elijah, but I want to be clear that I'll be working to repay you." "That's not necessary." "It is to me," she insisted. "I won't be another man's charity case. I can cook, clean, and keep books. I'll earn my keep." A small smile tugged at Elijah's lips. "You're a proud woman, Mrs. Morgan." "Miss Delilah Murray now," she corrected. "I'm reclaiming my family name." "Miss Murray, then. Is there anything you need from your husband's house?" Delilah thought of the few possessions she truly cared about. Just a small trunk with my mother's quilt and some personal items, and my books. Then let's retrieve them before we leave town. I doubt your husband will object, given the circumstances. True to Delilah's prediction, Clarence was nowhere to be found when they arrived at the modest house she'd called home. She efficiently packed her trunk with clothing, a cherished family Bible, and the few mementos of her parents she possessed. Her small collection of books Shakespeare, Dickens, and Austen were carefully wrapped in the quilt her mother had made for her wedding. "This is everything?" Elijah asked, lifting the trunk easily. Delilah looked around the house one last time. Despite 6 years of marriage, she felt no attachment to it. Everything that matters. They rode out of Salida as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the road. Delilah sat behind Elijah on his stallion, her trunk secured to a pack horse he'd purchased at the livery. The physical closeness made her uncomfortable at first, but the alternative was walking 5 miles, so she'd reluctantly accepted his offer to ride double. The landscape opened up as they left town, revealing the majesty of the Colorado mountains. Cottonwood trees lined a creek that meandered alongside the trail, their leaves shimmering silver green in the breeze. In other circumstances, Delilah might have found the scenery breathtaking. "May I ask where you're from originally?" Elijah broke the silence after they'd ridden for a while. "St. Louis," she replied. "My father was a teacher. He taught me to read and write before I was 5 years old." "And how did you end up in Salida?" Clarence was visiting St. Louis on business. "He seemed so charming then, so full of ambition. He promised me mountains and adventure." She laughed bitterly. "I got the mountains, at least. When did the gambling start?" "It was always there, I think. But it got worse after his freight business failed 2 years ago. He started drinking more, coming home less." She stopped, embarrassed to be sharing so much with a stranger. "I'm sorry," Elijah said simply. They crested a small rise and Elijah's ranch came into view. It wasn't grand, but it was well maintained. A modest main house stood on a gentle slope, with a barn and several corrals below it. A smaller cabin was situated a short distance away, near a stand of pines. "It's lovely," Delilah said truthfully. "It's small, but it suits me. That's your cabin there," he pointed. "The creek runs behind it. The water's good for drinking." As they approached, Delilah could see that the cabin, while simple, was solid and clean. Elijah helped her down from the horse and carried her trunk inside. The interior consisted of one main room with a stone fireplace, a small table with 2 chairs, and a bed in the corner. A curtained-off area presumably held a washstand. The furnishings were plain but adequate. "I'll bring you some firewood and supplies from the main house," Elijah said, stepping back outside. "The nights get cold here, even in summer." Delilah followed him out. "Thank you. This is more than I expected. It's not much, but it's safe. No one will bother you here." While Elijah fetched supplies, Delilah explored her temporary home. The cabin was surprisingly clean, with no evidence of long disuse. She wondered if Elijah had prepared it, knowing he might offer it to her. The thought both unsettled and touched her. He returned with firewood, a basket of food, and a lantern. "I've got my housekeeper, Mrs. Holloway, preparing more provisions. She'll bring them over in the morning. She comes 3 times a week to clean and cook." "I told you I can cook for myself," Delilah protested. "And you will. But you might as well have proper supplies to start with." He lit the lantern as the evening light began to fade. "There's a vegetable garden behind the main house. Help yourself to whatever's ripe." "You're very kind." Elijah looked uncomfortable with the praise. "I should head back to town. Mrs. Holloway will check on you tomorrow. If you need anything urgently, the main house is just up the hill." "You're not staying here, at your ranch?" "No, I have business in town for the next few days after that." He shrugged. I travel a fair bit. Delilah realized how little she knew about this man who had saved her from a terrible fate. What kind of business are you in, Mr. Grayson? A shadow crossed his face. I have investments in various enterprises, cattle mostly, but some mining interests too. The vague answer sparked Delilah's curiosity, but she didn't press. Well, thank you again. I won't forget your kindness. Elijah tipped his hat. Good night, Miss Murray. Bolt the door after I leave. After he rode away, Delilah did as instructed, then set about making the cabin comfortable. She built a small fire to ward off the evening chill and unpacked her few belongings. The events of the day caught up with her as she sat by the fire, and tears finally came, tears of relief, fear, anger, and uncertainty. She was free of Clarence, but what would she do now? She had no money, no immediate prospects, and was dependent on a stranger's charity. Still, for the first time in years, she felt a flicker of hope. Whatever happened next, she would face it on her own terms. The following morning, Delilah woke to a knock on the door. Mrs. Holloway, a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, stood outside with a basket of supplies. Mr. Grayson said you'd be staying a while, she said without preamble. I've brought you some essentials: flour, sugar, coffee, eggs from our hens and such. There's soap and a few other necessities too. That's very generous, Delilah said, inviting her in. Mr. Grayson is a generous man, Mrs. Holloway replied, setting the basket on the table. She looked around appraisingly. The cabin seems to suit you well enough. If you need anything else, I'm at the main house Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Thank you. I appreciate your help. Mrs. Holloway studied Delilah with frank curiosity. Town's talking about what happened yesterday. Not often we see a man buy a woman's freedom like that. Delilah stiffened. I'm not purchased property. Of course not, dear. That's what makes it unusual. Mr. Grayson made it clear you weren't becoming his. Well, you know what I mean. The older woman's cheeks flushed. He's a good man, whatever else they say about him. What do they say? Delilah asked, unable to contain her curiosity. Mrs. Holloway hesitated. It's not my place to gossip, but Mr. Grayson has his secrets like any man. Just know he's fair and honest, whatever his past might hold. The cryptic comment only increased Delilah's curiosity, but she didn't press further. I intend to earn my keep here. Is there work I can do around the ranch? Mr. Grayson didn't mention anything about you working, Mrs. Holloway said, surprised. Nevertheless, I won't be a charity case. I'm capable of contributing. Mrs. Holloway's expression softened. I understand pride, my dear. The garden needs tending, and I could use help with preserving the summer fruits. Beyond that, you'd have to speak to Mr. Grayson. I will when he returns. After Mrs. Holloway left, Delilah spent the morning exploring the area around the cabin. The creek provided clear, cold water, and the surrounding pines offered welcome shade. She discovered a path that led to the main house and another that wound through a wildflower meadow toward distant grazing land. The next few days fell into a pleasant routine. Delilah tended the vegetable garden, helped Mrs. Holloway with household tasks, and spent her evenings reading by the fire. The peace of the ranch worked as a balm on her troubled spirit, allowing her to begin processing the shock of her husband's betrayal and her sudden change in circumstances. On her 4th day at the ranch, she was picking beans in the garden when the sound of approaching horses caught her attention. Elijah rode in, accompanied by a young cowhand leading a wagon. Delilah straightened, suddenly conscious of her work-worn appearance, hair tied back with a simple ribbon, sleeves rolled up, and her oldest dress protected by an apron. Miss Murray, Elijah greeted her, dismounting. I see you've been making yourself useful. As I said I would, she replied. Your garden was being overrun by weeds. A smile tugged at his lips. "Mrs. Holloway mentioned you've been quite industrious. I appreciate the help." The cowhand unloaded several crates from the wagon under Elijah's direction, carrying them into the main house. "Supplies from town," Elijah explained, noticing Delilah's curious gaze. "And something for you, if you'll come up to the house." Intrigued, Delilah removed her apron and followed him. Inside, the main house was comfortably furnished but not ostentatious. Bookshelves lined one wall of the sitting room, drawing Delilah's immediate attention. "You like to read," she observed, scanning the titles. "When I have time," Elijah replied. "Feel free to borrow any books that interest you." One of the crates had been placed on a table in the sitting room. Elijah opened it and carefully removed something wrapped in brown paper. "I thought you might find this useful," he said, handing the package to her. Delilah unwrapped it to find a beautiful leather-bound journal and several high-quality pencils. "Mrs. Holloway mentioned you enjoy writing as well as reading," Elijah explained. "I thought you might like to have a proper journal." Delilah ran her fingers over the soft leather cover, touched by the thoughtful gift. "It's lovely, thank you. There's something else." He retrieved a small envelope from his vest pocket. "Information about teaching positions in Denver and Colorado Springs. I have contacts who could provide recommendations, should you be interested." Delilah took the envelope, surprised and moved by his consideration. "You've thought about my future more than I have. You mentioned your father was a teacher. I assumed you might want to follow in his footsteps." "I did teach briefly before I married. I never thought I might have that opportunity again." She looked up at him. "Why are you doing all this for me?" Elijah moved to the window, gazing out at the mountains. "Let's just say I'm in a position to help and you're in need of help." "It's as simple as that." "Nothing is ever that simple, Mr. Grayson." He turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "Perhaps not, but for now let's say it is." The sound of the front door opening interrupted their conversation. Mrs. Holloway entered with a basket of fresh laundry, stopping short when she saw them together. "Oh, I didn't realize you were back, Mr. Grayson. Shall I prepare dinner for two this evening?" Elijah glanced at Delilah. "Would you join me for dinner, Miss Murray? There are some matters we should discuss regarding your stay here." Delilah hesitated, then nodded. "I would be honored." "Wonderful," Mrs. Holloway said. "I'll prepare something special." After Mrs. Holloway bustled off to the kitchen, an awkward silence fell between Delilah and Elijah. "I should return to the garden," she said finally. "There's still work to be done." "Of course. I have matters to attend to as well. Shall we say dinner at 6? Delilah agreed and returned to the garden, her mind swirling with questions about her enigmatic benefactor. Despite his generosity, Elijah Grayson remained a mystery one she found herself increasingly eager to solve. That evening, Delilah dressed in her best remaining dress, a simple blue cotton with white trim that had seen better days but was still presentable. She pinned her dark hair up in a simple style and dabbed a bit of rose water behind her ears, a small luxury she'd allowed herself to keep when packing her few possessions. The sun was beginning its descent behind the mountains as she walked up to the main house. The landscape was painted in hues of gold and amber, casting a warm glow over the ranch. For a moment, Delilah paused to appreciate the beauty surrounding her. Despite the tumultuous circumstances that had brought her here, she couldn't deny the peace she felt in this place. Elijah greeted her at the door, dressed in a clean shirt and dark trousers. Without his trail dust and hat, he looked more refined than she'd initially thought. His dark hair, touched with silver at the temples, was neatly combed, and he'd trimmed his beard since she'd last seen him. "You look lovely, Miss Murray," he said, ushering her inside. "Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to dinner." Mrs. Holloway had outdone herself. The dining table was set with fine china and silver that must have been reserved for special occasions. A bouquet of wildflowers served as a centerpiece, and delicious aromas wafted from the kitchen. "I hope you don't mind dining in," Elijah said as he held her chair. "Salada's dining options are somewhat limited." "This is perfect," Delilah assured him. Mrs. Holloway served a meal of roast chicken, summer vegetables from the garden Delilah had been tending, and freshly baked bread. For dessert, there was apple pie with cream. Throughout the meal, they kept to safe topics: the weather, the beauty of Colorado, books they had both enjoyed. Elijah proved to be well-read and articulate, surprising Delilah with his knowledge of literature and current events. After Mrs. Holloway cleared the dessert plates and bid them good night, Elijah invited Delilah to join him in the sitting room. He poured her a small glass of sherry, which she accepted with slight hesitation. "I wanted to discuss your situation," he began, taking a seat across from her. "It's been a few days now. Have you given thought to your plans?" Delilah sipped the sherry, gathering her thoughts. "I have. First, I want to thank you properly for everything you've done. You saved me from a terrible fate, and I'll never forget that." "You've thanked me enough," he said dismissively. "Nevertheless, I am grateful. As for my plans—" She set down her glass. "The teaching positions you mentioned are intriguing. I would like to pursue that possibility, but I lack proper references and have no way to support myself while seeking such a position." "I can help with both those concerns," Elijah said. "As I mentioned, I have contacts who would provide references based on my recommendation, and as for support, you're welcome to stay here as long as necessary." "That's very generous, but I can't accept charity indefinitely. I need to work to support myself." Elijah studied her for a moment. "Actually, I may have a proposition for you. My business affairs require considerable record keeping, and I'm often away. Would you consider managing my accounts and correspondence in exchange for room, board, and a modest salary?" Delilah's eyes widened. "Are you offering me employment?" "I am. Mrs. Holloway is excellent at running the household, but numbers aren't her strong suit. My previous foreman handled some of the bookkeeping, but since he left, things have fallen into disarray. I would need to see the books to determine if I'm qualified," Delilah said cautiously. Elijah smiled at her prudence. "Of course. I can show you tomorrow. The position would be temporary until you secure a teaching post or decide on another path, but it would give you time to find your footing." Delilah considered the offer. It solved her immediate problems while preserving her dignity. "I accept on one condition, and that is that you'll be honest with me about your business affairs. I won't work with anything illegal or immoral." A flash of something amusement, respect, crossed Elijah's face. "I assure you, Miss Murray, my enterprises are entirely legitimate. Cattle, land, and some mining interests, as I mentioned before. Nothing that would compromise your integrity." "Then we have an agreement," Delilah said, extending her hand. Elijah took it, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "We do indeed." The next morning, Elijah showed Delilah to a small office off the sitting room. A desk piled with ledgers and correspondence dominated the space, and shelves filled with more books and papers lined the walls. "As you can see, I'm in desperate need of organization," he said ruefully. Delilah surveyed the chaos with a practiced eye. "I can manage this. My father taught me double-entry bookkeeping, and I kept the accounts for Clarence's business before it failed." "Excellent. I'll leave you to get acquainted with the system or lack thereof. Feel free to implement whatever changes you deem necessary." Delilah spent the day sorting through ledgers and correspondence, gradually piecing together the extent of Elijah's holdings. She was impressed by the diversity and success of his investments. Beyond the ranch, He owned shares in several mines, a stage line, and various properties throughout Colorado and neighboring territories. He was, she realized, considerably wealthier than his modest lifestyle suggested. As the days passed, Delilah fell into a new routine. Mornings were spent in the office, organizing Elijah's business affairs. Afternoons often found her in the garden or helping Mrs. Holloway with household tasks, more out of preference than obligation. Evenings were her own, usually spent reading from Elijah's extensive library or writing in the journal he had given her. Elijah himself remained something of an enigma. He came and went unpredictably, sometimes away for days at a time on business. When present, he was unfailingly polite and increasingly friendly, joining Delilah for meals and engaging her in stimulating conversation. Yet he maintained a certain reserve, deflecting personal questions and keeping aspects of his life private. Despite this, Delilah found herself drawn to him. There was an inherent decency in Elijah that contrasted sharply with Clarence's selfishness. He treated the ranch hands with respect, was generous to Mrs. Holloway, and never made Delilah feel like anything less than an equal, despite her dependent position. One evening, about 3 weeks after Delilah had begun working for Elijah, she was reviewing the accounts when she noticed a recurring payment to someone identified only as ES in Leadville. The payments were substantial $50 monthly for the past 5 years. When Elijah returned from checking the cattle, she asked him about it. "It's a personal matter," he said, his tone suddenly guarded. "I understand, but as your bookkeeper, I should know the nature of regular expenses." Elijah was quiet for a long moment. "It's support for a family member. That's all I care to say." Though curious, Delilah respected his privacy and didn't press further. Everyone had secrets, herself included. She hadn't told him everything about her marriage to Clarence, the humiliations she'd endured, the broken promises, the nights spent wondering if he would come home at all. The summer days grew longer, and Delilah found herself settling comfortably into life at the ranch. Her initial wariness around Elijah gradually gave way to genuine friendship. They shared a love of literature and often discussed books over dinner. He respected her intelligence and sought her opinions on business matters. For the first time since her parents died, Delilah felt valued for her mind, not just her domestic capabilities. Still, she reminded herself that their arrangement was temporary. She had applied for a teaching position in Colorado Springs, using the references Elijah had secured for her. The school term would begin in September, and if she was hired, she would leave the ranch by summer's end. The thought brought mixed emotions. She was eager to stand on her own feet again, to rebuild her life on her terms. Yet the prospect of leaving the ranch and Elijah filled her with an unexpected sadness. One hot July afternoon, Delilah was working in the garden when the sound of horses approaching at speed drew her attention. 2 riders galloped into the yard, pulling up sharply at the main house. One dismounted and pounded on the front door while the other remained vigilantly on horseback, scanning the surroundings. Concerned, Delilah set down her basket of vegetables and approached. As she drew nearer, she recognized the dismounted man as Sheriff Taylor from Salida. "Sheriff." "Is something wrong?" she called. The man turned, recognition dawning on his weathered face. "Mrs. Morgan, or Miss Murray, as I hear you're calling yourself now, is Grayson here. Mr. Grayson rode out to the north pasture this morning. What's this about?" Before the sheriff could answer, Elijah appeared, riding in from the direction of the pasture. He took in the scene quickly, his expression growing serious as he recognized the visitors. "Sheriff Taylor," he acknowledged, dismounting. "What brings you out here? We need to talk, Grayson." "Privately?" Elijah glanced at Delilah. "Miss Murray, would you mind giving us a moment?" Though reluctant, Delilah nodded and walked toward her cabin. Once inside, she moved to the window, unable to hear their conversation but watching their body language. The discussion appeared tense, with the sheriff doing most of the talking while Elijah listened, his posture growing increasingly rigid. After about 15 minutes, the sheriff and his deputy mounted their horses and rode away. Elijah stood watching them go, then turned toward Delilah's cabin, his expression troubled. A knock came at her door moments later. When she opened it, Elijah stood there, his face grim. "May I come in? There's something I need to explain." Delilah stepped aside, worry knotting her stomach. "What's happened? Is it something to do with Clarence?" Elijah entered and removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "No, nothing to do with your husband. It's about me. Sheriff Taylor brought some concerning news." He took a deep breath. "Samuel Watts was found dead in his office this morning." "Shot through the head," Delilah gasped. "That's terrible, but what does it have to do with you?" "Watts and I had a history, not a pleasant one. We were business rivals and things got ugly at times. Some people in town know this." "Surely the sheriff doesn't suspect you?" Delilah asked, disbelieving. "You've been here at the ranch." "Not all night. I rode into town late yesterday on business and didn't return until dawn." He sat heavily at her small table. "There's no direct evidence against me, but the timing is suspicious enough for questions." Delilah sat across from him, studying his troubled face. "Tell me honestly, Elijah, did you have anything to do with Watts's death?" His blue eyes met hers directly. "No, I disliked the man intensely, especially after witnessing how he treated you, but I didn't kill him." Relief washed over her. "Then you have nothing to fear. The truth will come out." "It's not that simple. There are complications in my past that make me an easy target for suspicion." Delilah waited, sensing he was struggling with whether to confide in her. Finally, Elijah spoke, his voice low. "Before I came to Colorado, I was involved in some dangerous business in Wyoming. I worked as a hired gun for a cattle baron during the range wars. I never killed anyone who wasn't trying to kill me first, but my reputation followed me here." The revelation stunned Delilah, though a part of her had suspected Elijah's past held violence. It explained his skill with weapons, his watchfulness, the respect tinged with fear that some showed him. "Is that why you helped me?" she asked quietly. "Seeking redemption for past sins?" Pain flashed across his face. "Maybe partly, but mostly because what Watts and your husband were doing was wrong, and I was in a position to stop it." Delilah reached across the table and took his hand. "I believe you're innocent of Watts's murder. And whatever your past holds, the man I've come to know these past weeks is decent and honorable." Elijah looked at their joined hands, then at her face. Something shifted in his expression: surprise, gratitude, and something deeper that made Delilah's heart beat faster. "Thank you for your faith," he said softly. "It means more than you know." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken emotion. Then Elijah gently withdrew his hand and stood. "I need to go back into town tomorrow to answer more questions. It would be best if you stayed here." "There's no need for you to be involved in this ugliness." "I am already involved," Delilah pointed out. "I was there when you confronted Watts. I could be a witness to the animosity between you." Elijah shook his head. "That would only confirm their suspicions. Besides, your reputation has suffered enough because of your husband's actions. I won't have you further scandalized by association with me." "I don't care about scandal," she insisted. "I care about justice and friendship," she added more softly. Something flickered in Elijah's eyes, a warmth that both thrilled and frightened Delilah with its intensity. For a moment, she thought he might say more, might acknowledge the growing connection between them. Instead, he placed his hat back on his head and moved toward the door. I appreciate your support, Delilah, more than I can express. But please stay at the ranch tomorrow, for my peace of mind if nothing else. Using her first name felt like a small but significant boundary crossed. Delilah nodded, recognizing that his concern was genuine. Be careful, Elijah. Always am, he replied with a grim smile, then left. That night, Delilah barely slept, her mind churning with worries about Elijah and revelations about his past. By dawn, she had made a decision. Regardless of his wishes, she wouldn't let him face these accusations alone. After breakfast, she saddled one of the gentler horses from the stable and rode into Salida. The town was buzzing with the news of Watts's murder, and Delilah felt eyes following her as she made her way to the sheriff's office. Through the window, she could see Elijah seated across from Sheriff Taylor, his posture tense but composed. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door. Both men looked up in surprise at her entrance. "Miss Murray," the sheriff acknowledged, "this isn't a good time." "Actually, Sheriff, I believe it's the perfect time. I have information relevant to your investigation." Elijah stood. "Delilah, I asked you to stay at the ranch. You did, but I decided my testimony was more important than your desire to protect me." She turned to the sheriff. "I want to make a formal statement about Samuel Watts and his character." Sheriff Taylor gestured to a chair. "Very well. What do you have to say?" For the next hour, Delilah provided a detailed account of her encounter with Watts's willingness to accept her as payment for Clarence's debt, his cruel intentions for her future, and Elijah's intervention. She described Watts's known gambling operations and rumors of other illegal activities. "Mr. Grayson had every reason to dislike Watts after witnessing that scene," she concluded. "But acting as he did, paying my husband's debt and freeing me from a terrible fate, speaks to his character. A man who would spend $800 to free a stranger is not the same man who would shoot someone in cold blood over a business rivalry." Sheriff Taylor listened intently, taking notes. "Your statement paints Mr. Watts in a very negative light, Miss Murray. But it doesn't provide Mr. Grayson with an alibi for the night of the murder." "No, but it does establish that there were likely many others with motives to harm Mr. Watts. Have you investigated his gambling operations? The men who owed him money, the women he may have exploited?" The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "We're pursuing all leads. Are you? Or did you simply focus on Mr. Grayson because of his past, Delilah?" Elijah warned quietly. Sheriff Taylor cleared his throat. "Your concerns are noted, Miss Murray. For now, Mr. Grayson is free to go, though I ask that he remain available for further questioning." Outside the sheriff's office, Elijah gripped Delilah's arm, his expression a mixture of gratitude and exasperation. "That was both the bravest and most foolish thing anyone has ever done for me," he said. "Do you realize you've now associated yourself publicly with a murder suspect? The gossip will be merciless." "Let them gossip," Delilah replied, lifting her chin. "I've survived worse than wagging tongues." They walked toward their horses, tied at the hitching post outside the general store. The streets of Salida seemed unusually busy, with people finding excuses to linger, watching them surreptitiously. "We should leave town separately," Elijah suggested. "It would be better for your reputation." "My reputation was compromised the moment my husband tried to sell me," Delilah reminded him. "I'm not concerned about appearances." Before Elijah could respond, a commotion erupted down the street. A man staggered out of the saloon, clearly drunk despite the early hour. With a shock, Delilah recognized Clarence. "There she is," he shouted, pointing at Delilah. "My wayward wife living in sin with a killer." Elijah stepped protectively in front of Delilah. "Go home, Morgan, you're drunk." "Don't tell me what to do," Clarence slurred, stumbling closer. "You stole my wife. And now they're saying you killed Watts too. Always knew there was something wrong about you, Grayson." A small crowd began to gather, drawn by the spectacle. "I didn't steal your wife," Elijah replied, his voice level but carrying. "You tried to sell her to pay your gambling debts. You forfeited any right to call her yours the moment you treated her like property." Clarence's face contorted with rage. "She is my property. The law says so." He fumbled at his waist, pulling out a small pistol. Several women in the crowd screamed. Elijah pushed Delilah behind him, his hand moving to his own gun. "Put it down, Morgan," he warned. "You don't want to do this." "Clarence, please," Delilah called, stepping out from behind Elijah despite his protective arm. "This solves nothing. Go home and sober up." For a moment, Clarence's bleary eyes focused on her and something like pain crossed his features. Then his expression hardened again. "You're coming home with me," he insisted, waving the gun unsteadily. "Where you belong." "That's not her home anymore," Elijah said firmly. "And she doesn't belong to anyone. Now put down the gun before someone gets hurt." Sheriff Taylor pushed through the crowd, his hand on his own weapon. "That's enough. Morgan, drop that gun now." Whether from the sheriff's command or his own unsteady condition, Clarence's hand wavered. The gun discharged, the bullet striking the dirt near Elijah's feet. In one fluid motion, Elijah drew his own weapon and fired. The bullet struck Clarence's shoulder, spinning him around. The pistol fell from his grasp as he collapsed with a cry of pain. "Someone get the doctor." Sheriff Taylor ordered, kneeling beside the wounded man. Delilah stood frozen, shock rendering her momentarily immobile. Elijah gently took her arm. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low with concern. She nodded numbly. "Is he?" "He'll live." I aimed for his shoulder. The town doctor arrived and, with help from bystanders, carried Clarence to his office. Sheriff Taylor approached Elijah and Delilah after securing Clarence's weapon. "Clearly self-defense," he acknowledged. "Morgan fired first with witnesses. Still, I'll need statements from both of you." After providing their accounts of the incident, Elijah and Delilah were finally free to leave. The ride back to the ranch was silent, each lost in their own thoughts. The peaceful sanctuary of the ranch seemed a world away from the violence and ugliness they'd encountered in town. At the fork where the path divided between the main house and Delilah's cabin, Elijah pulled his horse to a stop. "I think we should talk," he said quietly. Delilah nodded, her emotions too tumultuous for words. They settled on the porch of the main house, where Mrs. Holloway brought them tea before discreetly withdrawing. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and wildflowers. "I'm sorry you had to witness that," Elijah began. "And I'm sorry I had to shoot your husband." "Ex-husband," Delilah corrected automatically. "And you had no choice. He would have killed you or me in his state." Elijah studied her face. "You're remarkably composed for someone who just saw her former spouse shot." "I think I'm still in shock," she admitted, "but also relieved." "Does that make me a terrible person?" "No, it makes you human. Clarence chose his path. The consequences are his to bear." They sat in companionable silence for a while, sipping tea and watching the sun begin its descent behind the mountains. "What happens now?" Delilah finally asked. "Clarence will face charges for attempted murder once he recovers. As for Watts's murder investigation," Elijah sighed. "I'm still a suspect, but your testimony helped. The sheriff is looking into other possibilities now." "Good." Delilah set down her cup. "And what about us?" The question hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken emotions and possibilities. "That depends," Elijah said carefully, "on what you want." "I'm not sure anymore. For weeks, I've focused on rebuilding my independence, finding a teaching position, standing on my own feet again." But today made me realize how quickly everything can change, how precious time is. Are you saying you might stay? Hope tinged Elijah's voice. Delilah met his gaze. I'm saying I'm open to possibilities I hadn't considered before. Working here with you, it's given me purpose and joy. I'd forgotten what that felt like. Elijah reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. Delilah, I need to be honest with you. My feelings for you have grown beyond friendship or professional respect. But I've hesitated to speak because of your situation, your recent freedom from a bad marriage, your dependence on me for shelter and employment. The last thing I want is for you to feel pressured or obligated. Delilah's heart quickened. I've never felt pressured by you, Elijah. From the first day when you bought my freedom but not my body, you've treated me with nothing but respect. That's part of why I've come to care for you as well. You have. The vulnerability in his expression touched her deeply. Yes, more than I thought possible after everything with Clarence. Elijah's thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. I don't want to rush you. You've been through so much, and there's still the matter of Watts's murder hanging over us. But I want you to know that if you choose to stay for whatever reason, and for however long, I would be honored. And if I choose to pursue the teaching position, then I would support your decision completely, while hoping you might still consider a future that includes me. The sincerity in his voice brought tears to Delilah's eyes. After years of manipulation and betrayal with Clarence, Elijah's straightforward honesty was both refreshing and deeply moving. I need time, she said softly. Not because I don't care for you, but because I want to be certain of my own heart and mind before making any new commitments. Of course, Elijah agreed immediately. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. As if to seal this understanding, he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was old-fashioned and respectful, yet it sent a thrill through Delilah unlike anything she'd experienced before. That night, alone in her cabin, Delilah wrote in her journal, trying to make sense of the tumultuous events and emotions of the day. Her feelings for Elijah had been growing steadily, but she'd suppressed them, telling herself it was merely gratitude or the natural result of their close working relationship. Now, with their feelings acknowledged, she faced a difficult choice. The teaching position in Colorado Springs represented independence and professional fulfillment goals she'd cherished since her marriage began to fail. But staying at the ranch offered a different kind of fulfillment. Meaningful work, a beautiful home, and the possibility of love with a man who genuinely respected her mind and spirit. Could she have both? Perhaps not immediately, but in time. The thought of building a life with Elijah, one where she might still pursue her educational aspirations in some form, was increasingly appealing. Over the next week, life at the ranch settled back into its routine, though with a new awareness between Delilah and Elijah. Their interactions carried an undercurrent of anticipation and possibility. They were more careful around each other, more conscious of casual touches and lingering glances. Yet there was also a deepening comfort in their companionship, as if acknowledging their feelings had removed a barrier between them. Then came news that changed everything. Sheriff Taylor rode out to the ranch one evening, his expression more relaxed than Delilah had ever seen it. "We've solved Watts's murder," he announced without preamble. One of his dealers confessed. Watts had been skimming from the man's earnings for years, threatening to expose some past crime if he complained. Finally snapped and shot him. Relief washed over Elijah's face. "So I'm no longer a suspect. You're in the clear, Grayson. Though I still think you're a dangerous man," the sheriff added with a hint of grudging respect. "Only to those who deserve it," Elijah replied evenly. After the sheriff departed, Elijah found Delilah in the garden where she'd been listening from a distance. "You heard?" he asked, his smile broader than she'd ever seen it. "Yes, I'm so relieved, as am I, but not just for myself." He took her hands in his. "This cloud of suspicion, it would have followed us, tainted whatever might grow between us. Now we can move forward if that's what you want." Delilah squeezed his hands. "I received a letter today, too, from the school board in Colorado Springs." Elijah's smile faltered slightly. "The teaching position. They've offered it to me. Classes begin in 6 weeks. I see." He released her hands, stepping back slightly. "Congratulations, it's what you wanted." "It was what I wanted," Delilah corrected. "Now I'm not so sure." Hope rekindled in Elijah's eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean that my priorities have changed. These past weeks have shown me what's truly important, not just independence, but connection, purpose, love." She took a deep breath. "I'm going to decline the position, Elijah. I want to stay here with you." For a moment he seemed unable to speak. Then he closed the distance between them, cradling her face in his hands. "Are you certain? I don't want you to sacrifice your dreams for me." "I'm not sacrificing anything. I'm choosing a different dream, a better one. I can still teach. There's a school right here in Salida. Or I could tutor local children. But most importantly, I could continue working with you, building something meaningful together." Elijah's smile was radiant. "Delilah Murray, you are the most remarkable woman I've ever known. When I saw you that day in Salida, standing defiant despite your circumstances, I knew you were special. But I never imagined you would come to mean so much to me." "Nor I you," she admitted. "When my husband tried to sell me, I thought my life was over. Instead, it was just beginning." Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Elijah lowered his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. Delilah answered by sliding her arms around his neck, drawing him closer. When they finally parted, breathless and flushed, Elijah rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Delilah. I think I have since the moment you insisted on repaying me for helping you." Delilah laughed softly. "And I love you, though I fought against it, thinking it was too soon, too complicated." "It is complicated," he acknowledged. "People will talk. Your ex-husband, once he recovers, may cause more trouble, and I still have enemies from my past." "I'm not afraid," Delilah assured him. "After everything I've survived, gossip and old grudges seem manageable obstacles." Elijah kissed her again, more deeply this time. When they separated, his expression had grown serious. "There's something else we should discuss. The payments you found in the ledger to ES in Leadville." "You don't have to explain," Delilah began, but he shook his head. "I want to. No more secrets between us." He led her to a bench beneath an old apple tree. "ES is Emily Sullivan. She has a son, my son, though he doesn't know it. I met Emily years ago before my time in Wyoming. We were briefly engaged, but when she discovered the nature of my work, I was riding with a rough crowd, then she broke it off. She married another man who died of pneumonia 3 years later." "And the child?" Delilah asked softly. "Thomas. He's 10 now." Emily named her husband as his father on the birth certificate, but she told me the truth when I returned to Colorado. I've supported them financially ever since, though I've kept my distance to protect Thomas from my reputation and to respect Emily's wishes. She's remarried now to a good man who treats Thomas as his own." Delilah processed this information, understanding now why Elijah had been reluctant to discuss the payments. "Thank you for telling me. It can't have been easy carrying this alone. I've made peace with it. Emily's happy and Thomas is thriving. That's what matters." He took her hand. "But I wanted you to know everything about me before we go any further. My past isn't spotless, Delilah. I've made mistakes, some I deeply regret." "As have I," she replied. That's part of being human. What matters is how we move forward. As the summer waned, Delilah and Elijah's relationship blossomed. They worked side by side during the day, Delilah managing the business affairs, Elijah overseeing the ranch operations. Evenings were spent in comfortable conversation or reading together by the fire. Sometimes they rode to the high meadows, where wildflowers painted the landscape in vibrant colors, and the air was crisp and clean. On those rides, Elijah shared stories of his travels, while Delilah spoke of her childhood in St. Louis and her dreams for the future. In late August, they received word that Clarence had recovered from his wound and stood trial for attempted murder. The evidence against him was overwhelming, with multiple witnesses to his threatening behavior and the first shot fired. He was sentenced to 5 years in the territorial prison. "Are you all right?" Elijah asked when the news arrived. "Yes," Delilah said, surprised to find it was true. "I feel no joy in his punishment, but no sorrow either, just closure." With that final tie to her past severed, Delilah embraced her future wholeheartedly. She approached the school board in Salida and secured a position teaching 3 days a week, allowing her to continue her work at the ranch. The townsfolk, initially scandalized by her living arrangement with Elijah, gradually accepted their relationship as they witnessed the obvious respect and affection between them. On a crisp September evening, with the aspen trees turning gold in the mountains, Elijah proposed. They were riding back from a picnic in the high meadow, the sunset painting the landscape in fiery hues. "Marry me, Delilah," he said simply, reining his horse to a stop beside a clear mountain stream. "Be my partner in all things in business, in this ranch, in life." Delilah's heart soared. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "With all my heart, yes." They were married in October in a small ceremony at the ranch. Mrs. Holloway cried happy tears, and even Sheriff Taylor attended, bringing a bottle of fine whiskey as a wedding gift. Delilah wore a new dress of ivory satin, ordered specially from Denver, and flowers from the last of the garden blooms in her hair. As they exchanged vows under the golden canopy of autumn leaves, Delilah reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. The day Clarence had tried to sell her had seemed like the end of everything. Instead, it had been a beginning painful and frightening, but ultimately leading to happiness greater than she'd ever imagined possible. That night, as they lay together in the master bedroom that was now theirs to share, Elijah traced the curve of Delilah's cheek with gentle fingers. "I want you to know something," he said softly. "That day in Salida when I paid your husband's debt, I didn't do it expecting anything in return. Not your body, not your heart. I know," she whispered, kissing his palm. "That's why you have both now, freely given." Epilogue. 5 years later, the sound of children's laughter floated through the open windows of the ranch house, now expanded to accommodate a growing family. Delilah smiled as she watched her 4-year-old son, James, chase his 2-year-old sister, Mary, around the yard while Elijah supervised their play, occasionally swinging one or the other into the air to delighted squeals. So much had changed in 5 years. The ranch had prospered under their joint management, and Elijah had sold most of his more distant business interests to focus on their home and family. Delilah still taught at the school in Salida, now as the head mistress, having established a reputation for excellence in education. They had visited Thomas in Leadville the previous summer. The boy, now 15, had been told the truth about his parentage, and while the initial meeting was awkward, a tentative relationship had begun to form. Emily and her husband had welcomed Elijah and Delilah graciously, acknowledging that the past was best left behind them. Clarence had been released from prison earlier that year. He'd written to Delilah, a surprisingly humble letter expressing regret for his actions and wishing her well in her new life. He had moved east, hoping for a fresh start away from the memories and reputation he'd created in Colorado. Delilah had wished him well in return, finding forgiveness easier now that her own happiness was secure. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Elijah gathered their children and brought them inside for supper. They ate together at the big oak table, sharing stories of their day: James's discovery of a frog by the creek, Mary's first attempt to write her name, Elijah's progress with the new foals, Delilah's plans for the school's end-of-year celebration. Later, with the children tucked into bed and the house quiet, Delilah and Elijah sat on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the clear mountain sky. His arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest, they enjoyed a moment of peaceful companionship. "I was thinking about that day we met," Elijah said, breaking the comfortable silence. "How different our lives might have been if I hadn't ridden into Salida at that exact moment." Delilah considered this. "I believe we would have found each other somehow. Some connections are meant to be." "A romantic notion from a practical woman," he teased, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Perhaps you've made me a romantic," she replied, smiling up at him. "Or perhaps I always was beneath the practicality. Either way, I'm grateful." His expression grew serious. "Do you ever regret it?" "Not taking that teaching position in Colorado Springs. You could have had a different life, perhaps an easier one." "Never," Delilah said firmly. "This life, our ranch, our children, our work together is everything I never knew I wanted. I was looking for independence, but what I found was so much more valuable: partnership, true equality, love." Elijah drew her closer. "When I paid your husband's debt, I bought your freedom, not your heart, that you gave freely, and it's the greatest gift I've ever received." "And you gave me yours in return," Delilah replied softly. "Along with a home, a family, and a future brighter than I ever imagined possible." As night settled fully over the mountains, they remained on the porch, content in each other's presence, secure in the knowledge that what had begun as a desperate act of kindness had blossomed into a love story neither could have predicted, but both now cherished beyond measure. The ranch slept peacefully under the starlit Colorado sky, a haven built not on ownership or obligation, but on respect, choice, and love, freely given, the most valuable currency of all.